Have you ever felt just a deep sort of unnameable ache, like you don't quite fit? Or maybe this really intense longing for something you can't quite grasp, perhaps even like an almost involuntary pull towards open skies or, big stretches of water. Well, today we're diving into some really thought-provoking sources. They explore this fascinating concept, angelic souls that fell into human bodies. So our deep dive today is all about understanding the unique signs, the experiences, and really the profound journey of these individuals, just as described in the material we've looked, giving you a fresh perspective on this whole idea.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, actually, how these sources seem to offer a coherent framework for understanding what's often a very specific and deeply personal inner experience. They don't just describe these feelings, do they? They actually propose a pretty compelling purpose behind this particular journey.
Okay, so let's unpack. The sources, they start by describing many of these individuals carrying, they call it a prior wing. It shows up as this quiet, persistent, something that seems to live just beneath their everyday. It's described as this complex set of signals from their body, their heart, their mind, almost like they're picking up on frequencies from a different kind of, and their nervous system specifically often register the world with what's called heightened response. Think about it. Bright light, sudden noise, even like strong touch or intense, it can apparently produce an immediate, almost physical reaction. Now, it might feel like alarm at first, right? But the sources suggest it's actually an echo of an earlier calibration to subtler vibrations. So it's not just being sensitive, it's more like their internal tuning fork is set to a completely different frequency, making the ordinary world feel a little too intense.
Exactly. And building on that, the sources suggest these beings were once radiant beings of light clothed in wings of fire, living in total freedom in eternity. But then something big happened, fell into flesh. Their wings, which are really a metaphor for their expansive awareness, this sort of super mental way of knowing, were torn. Their light got hidden under skin and bone and memories scattered. This descent demanded contraction, anchoring all that vast radiance in what's called a body of clay, pulling them into time, matter, limitation.
Wow.
And it's crucial the sources stress this wasn't random, not a mistake. They actually define it as a cosmic decision. The idea wings burned off isn't literal, obviously. It's more about how those huge intuitive faculties diminish when they hit the density of the physical world.
Yes.
And this is key. The essence survives. It's tucked away, they say, in the soul's architecture. Retrievable, not by just remembering, but through, dedicated practice and inner work.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, like a kind of divine recalibration. Okay, now this is where paradoxical. These exiled souls, the sources say, often show this distinctive paradox. They bind together extraordinary tenderness with a blunt intolerance. So compassion is just like second nature. Yet righteous anger appears quickly in situations where suffering continues without remedy.
Quite a contrast.
Yay. And that heightened sensitivity we talked about, it often grows into this profound, sometimes overwhelming empathy. The sources explain this empathy can become a heavy burden. They tend to feel other people's pain almost like a private wound inside themselves. And this often leads to exhaustion, feeling totally drained by just ordinary social stuff. But the flip side is this deep sensitivity also gives them this uncommon capacity to read what is almost like a sixth sense.
Yeah, which naturally brings up the question, how on earth do you navigate that, such intense emotional landscape? Well, the material describes a singular bandwidth of experience for these individuals. What that means, essentially, is they often experience life through these really profound emotional ranges. Grief and luminous creativity can exist side by side, and that helps explain why some of them can move others so deeply with their art or their presence, yet carry this deep loneliness that's maybe hard to even talk about.
That resonates.
And it's intriguing, too, how their presence in community tends to subtly shift the ambient frequencies, the energy or the mood of the place. It happens through a kind of quiet, subtle influence, not necessarily through being in charge or being the loudest voice. Their presence just alters the dynamic somehow.
So, with all that going on inside, how do they typically express themselves and deal with their physical environment? Well, creativity, it seems, often pops up as a natural response, like to this inner pressure, this deep longing needing an outlet. These creative acts might be sudden songs, images, stories, or small objects that carry a quality of recognition for others, even if the creator can't quite explain where it came from.
We're almost channeling something.
Exactly. But the same intensity that fuels this incredible creativity can sometimes fuel what the sources call self-sabotage, because that depth of inner feeling can just burn right through ordinary routines, making sustained, mundane tasks feel impossible. And then there are their physical habits, their attraction. Many report an almost involuntary pull toward open spaces, heights, bodies of water, places where the horizon is up. These places, suggest, connect more easily with that memory of flight, that feeling of expansion to have.
And what's really striking is how, conversely, enclosed rooms, fluorescent light, or crowded conditions often trigger anxiety or an urge to withdraw. The sources are careful here. They clarify this should not be misread as mere shyness, but as a physiological preference for environments that allow broader resonance. Basically, they just feel better, function better in spaces that feel open and expansive. It connects to that deep memory of freedom.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not just psychological, but physical.
Exactly. And the material also points to specific sensory markers, things like unusual reactions to birds, feathers, wind, light, like someone just stopping, captivated by a bird flying past, or feeling a sudden deep calm when sunlight hits their skin. These little things, these almost involuntary responses, the sources suggest they hint at a living archive lodged in the body that still remembers certain motions and textures from before.
Wow, a living archive in the body. That's quite an image. Okay, so that connection to environment is fascinating. But what about relationship? How do these exiled souls typically experience connection with others? The sources describe some particular signatures, often showing up as extremes of attachment or withdrawal. They might swing between really intense connection and then suddenly needing to pull back in cycles.
Right, that push-pull dynamic.
Yeah, partnerships, for instance, can become these arenas, as the sources put it, where that memory of otherness meets the practical demand of care. And that can cause friction, can't it? If a partner expects consistency, routine, but the exiled soul needs this deep meaning, this profound expression, feel alive. Friendships, too, might be these deep, short-lived bonds that are incredibly impactful, change your life direction, but maybe don't last for decades. And in communities, they can be seen as both inspiring and difficult, often at the same time, because they tend to speak truths that unsettle comfortable assumptions.
Which isn't always comfortable for the group, is it?
Not at all. So these patterns, while they can be really rich, they also carry risk. The sources really hammer home that learning healthy boundaries becomes essential, because without clear limits, that natural, compassionate giving can just lead to total depletion. And they might confuse giving from the heart with this sort of ancient impulse to return to a prior state by any means, like trying to merge or dissolve boundaries unsafely.
It definitely raises that crucial question. How do you manage such intense inner energy wisely? The material talks about an inner fire. This fire lives within those who, once moved as these luminous beings. And it functions as both engine and weather. So it provides intense clarity, a real driving purpose, this capacity to feel across huge ranges.
The engine part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it also produces internal storms, these huge emotional or energetic surges that the human system has to learn to handle without, breaking. This energy deeply shapes their temperament. It accelerates emotional responses, sharpens their moral sensitivity, makes ordinary life feel either too small or unbearably precious. And the sources really highlight that without wise containment, this fire can just exhaust them, wound them, or overwhelm them and others.
So containment is key.
Absolutely. And the burdens of this inner heat often show up in ways the person might just think is their personality instead of seeing it as part of the spiritual inheritance. Things like that profound, deep loneliness, chronic hyperarousal, sudden waves of grief for some unnamed place or home, and repeatedly collapse giving too much. Yet, is the paradox again, very same source bring these incredible gifts. Practical, like an uncommon capacity to hold emotional feel. They can literally shift the mood in a room, rapid perception of what others cannot say aloud, a striking creative vision that reframes ordinary reality, and the ability to generate a presence that can either calm things down or really catalyze change in group. These gifts, when they're developed with this and, importantly, ethical clarity, are presented as actual tools of repair, instruments for the public good.
That's such a powerful duality. The burden and the gift, both coming from that. Where does this all lead? What's the ultimate journey?
Well, the sources are pretty clear that the path of the fallen soul doesn't just stay stuck in that ache of separation or the weight of exile forever. Instead, every stage of descent, every fragment of memory, every fire of struggle points toward an eventual return. But, and this is important, it's not a return to the realm they left behind. It's described as a higher form of integration where spirit and flesh no longer oppose each other.
So it's not about escaping humanity.
Exactly. It's not about escaping human life at all. The material stresses it's about fulfilling it so fully that human existence becomes the vessel for divine radiance. It completely reframes the exile. It's not a tragedy. It's a sacred initiation. And this return marks the completion of this huge transformative process. That's quite profound.
Yeah.
The idea that exile itself was a disguised form of belonging, what might have felt like punishment or just this harsh fall, turns out to be necessary preparation. Like the soul needed limitation, needed the density of form to develop qualities it couldn't have grown in just boundless light. Qualities like compassion, patience, the strength to endure. These really only grow when you feel the weight of things, right? The weight of time, of loss.
They need resistance.
Precisely. And these very qualities, the sources say, actually formed the very wings of return. Connecting this to the bigger picture, this great return involves a deep reconciliation. Spirit learning to honor the body, the flesh learning to express spirit. It happens when the body isn't seen as a prison anymore, but as a temple, when the divine essence is recognized right there in the heart of ordinary life. So the once exiled soul finds that heaven wasn't actually lost. It was just waiting to be found right here in the fabric of daily existence. This leads to a unified identity, someone who can feel hunger and holiness in the same moment without it being a contradiction.
Fully integrated.
Yes. And the wider purpose isn't just personal. It's about collective elevation. Each soul finishing its cycle becomes a living bridge between dimensions, grounding compassion, clarity, courage into our shared human field. Their lives become teachings just by being lived. No doctrine needed. They radiate outward, inspiring others to trust their own struggles, find meaning in their own shadows. The final stage is described as a freedom of full participation, culminating in a kind of ascension where heaven and earth genuinely join within the same.
Wow, what an incredible arc. A perspective that takes us from that initial ache, that feeling of otherness, all the way to this ultimate integration and the freedom that comes from truly fulfilling as a vessel for the divine. It's a really profound transcribe there.
It really is. And this deep dive, it suggests that maybe what feels like a burden for you, or perhaps an inexplicable, persistent longing, it could actually be a subtle signature, a hint of a unique heritage, pointing towards a really powerful purpose. So it kind of raises an important question for you, our listener. As you reflect on all this, where might you recognize echoes of this journey? Maybe within yourself, or perhaps in people you know. And what new understanding might that bring to the challenges and indeed the unique gifts you encounter in your own life?
That's definitely a powerful thought to sit with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today.